Hey guys, just a reminder, this is not official medical advice. For such, please seek an appointment with a licensed medical provider. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Explain This. I'm with the star of the show, Robin Riddle. Robin, it's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you too, Ben.
As always, I start off these shows super intrigued, excited about a new topic, and today is that exactly. We have a new topic, one that I know is in your wheelhouse because you specialize in functional fertility. Talk to us a little bit, kind of what lane are we going down today with fertility?
So today I want to kind of dive into one of the more under-discussed root causes of fertility struggles, and that's insulin resistance. And this is something that applies both to men and women whenever we're dealing with fertility and taking a more functional medicine approach. So we've talked about insulin resistance before. I've got tons of videos about it. We talk about it all the time with our patients. But I feel like when it comes to the fertility world, it's one of those things that really gets missed very commonly. Um, One of those things I would think fertility clinics would be looking at and diving into more, but I'm just not seeing that a lot.
That's
Um,
interesting, Robin. Like when I think of fertility, I think of all the different labs that we draw. I think of,
yeah.
all these different methods we can use, but I've never heard insulin resistance along with it.
Yeah, and it's a huge factor. I mean, rates of insulin resistance are skyrocketing within our population as a whole. Just obesity is going up. The high carb foods and high sugar foods and processed foods that we're eating is going up. So it's becoming a really common problem. So common that I feel like it's kind of passed over, like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. It won't have that big of an effect. But in reality, insulin resistance, blood sugar stabilization has a critical effect. And so we're not just talking about diabetes, not just talking about PCOS, even very mild insulin resistance can have a significant effect.
Mm.
And this can affect ovulation, egg and sperm quality, hormone balance, ability to implant a pregnancy, and pregnancy outcomes as a whole.
Mm.
So we'll dive first into what insulin resistance is. And like I said, we've talked about this before. I've got a couple videos about this. So just a quick brief overview. Insulin resistance is basically when your cells in the body stop responding well to insulin. So the body produces more and more insulin to help manage blood sugar levels.
Mm.
Over time, this will lead to high insulin and unstable glucose levels, and eventually A1C will rise. Um, One of the things that I see missed is a lot of clinics, if they are looking at blood sugar, they're going to look at a fasting glucose level and they're going to look at a hemoglobin A1C, but they never look at insulin, fasted insulin. So this is kind of the precursor to all the other issues. Insulin levels will rise long before we see glucose levels going up or the A1C going up. So just because you have a normal hemoglobin A1C does not mean you don't have insulin resistance. And the insulin resistance is really what can wreak havoc on fertility. So like I said, when we're looking at women, insulin resistance can disrupt ovulation. We see this a lot with PCOS, but even women who don't have PCOS can have disrupted ovulation just from insulin resistance. We can stimulate excess androgen, which is testosterone production. It promotes inflammation, and this is a big thing we talk about with all patients, is insulin resistance and inflammation. This is why we love our GLP-1 medicines, because they help with inflammation. It's because it helps insulin resistance. Insulin resistance can damage the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cells. So the mitochondrial function within the eggs or oocytes can be damaged by insulin resistance. And it can even alter the receptivity of the endometrium, meaning the pregnancy, if you did conceive, it's going to be more difficult to implant that pregnancy into the uterus if we have insulin resistance.
Now, so we're talking about insulin resistance in terms of trying to get pregnant versus
Mm-hmm.
okay, because I was gonna you'll love this, Robin. I was like thinking to myself, I might sound quasi smart here and mention gestational diabetes, and then and then I,
Well, it can lead to that. So that's one of the things that it definitely can lead to. So
okay.
if we are able to get pregnant, I've got a whole list of complications that can come along with um, having insulin resistance in pregnancy. Right now, I'm just focusing on trying to get pregnant
Got it.
because insulin resistance can have such a negative effect on the ability to even get pregnant to begin with.
That is because people are not thinking about this. That you're exactly
No.
right. Yes.
Yeah, and so it's not just women that are affected by this. This also will affect men.
Hmm.
So insulin resistance can lower testosterone production. It lowers sperm motility, which is like the ability for the sperm to move and go where they need to. It even has an impact on the integrity of the DNA that's carried within the sperm.
Mm.
So like we have a higher risk for DNA fragmentation, which we've done a video on that before. We'll have lower semen quality, lower free and total testosterone
Mm.
in men with insulin resistance. So I always say it's a 50-50 equation when we're looking at fertility. So men need to be just as healthy as the women do going into the journey of trying to conceive.
One thing that stands out is, as you were talking about insulin resistance, and we see this all throughout, the practices, is that it's so easy to miss, and
Oh,
because
absolutely.
nobody assumes that they have insulin resistance,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm sure it's that way with fertility.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of the times by the time the patients get to me, unfortunately, so many of them have already been way down the fertility journey pathway already.
Hmm.
So they've kind of been through the ringer and it's so basic. Like insulin resistance is so basic, but this is something that's been missed for long times for a lot of these people, and it can be so frustrating to come back to that. And it's like, oh, that's a huge piece that we've not been working on that we could have been for the last couple of years for most people.
Out of curiosity, and I might be jumping a tad ahead, Robin, I apologize. Um, is this like one of the first things you're looking at when somebody comes in to see you for a functional fertility visit? Is this like number one? And are you insulin resistant?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a whole list of labs that we do for an initial fertility visit. So my preference with my fertility patients, again, most of them have already been through the ringer. Most of them have already had a lot done. My preference is I do my long list of labs before I ever see them. So that way on that first visit, I have answers.
Mm.
It's not months of dragging out and testing and all this kind of stuff. And so we do a set of fasted blood work before I even see the patients, and insulin is one of the top things that's on that fasted blood work.
Got it.
So the first time I see a patient, I'm going to know if they have insulin resistance or not, and it's something that we're going to be talking about.
Is that one of the first things that you would encourage a patient to solve? Like, okay,
Absolutely.
okay,
Yeah, has a massive impact. So
yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
Um, and so looking at insulin, but I am also looking at the A1C, which is the 3-month average of your blood glucose readings. So sometimes if we've been insulin resistant for longer periods of time, your insulin levels will actually start to drop and go back to a more normal range. But then your blood glucose levels start to rise and your hemoglobin A1C, which is that average of the glucose levels, that starts to rise. So we're
Mm.
looking at all three of those.
Got it.
And so, like I said, A1C shows your average blood sugar over the last 2 to 3 months. There was a big study done in 2020. It was specifically for women undergoing IVF, but we can kind of extrapolate that data across fertility in general. So these women going through IVF, it was found that if they had an A1C of 5.6 or higher, which 5.6 is technically still within normal, these women had a 40% reduction in implantation and pregnancy rates
Mm.
compared to women with a lower A1C.
It, 40% is a lot. Am I wrong?
40% is huge.
Okay.
And when you're paying that kind of money to go through IVF and
Yes.
there's something as simple as an A1C that's reducing your chances by 40%, it's huge. It's
Yes.
huge.
Yes.
So for functional fertility, we're really aiming for a hemoglobin A1C between 4.9 to 5.2%. That's going to be optimal range for best pregnancy outcomes.
Mm.
And so when we find this, there's a lot of different ways that we talk about to improve insulin sensitivity. So if I have someone who is extremely insulin resistant, meaning we've got really high levels, A1Cs elevated, especially if we're dealing with obesity and all of this, sometimes I actually encourage patients to take a step back from trying to conceive and give us 3 to 6 months to get really intensive on addressing this insulin resistance, and I'll throw in GLP-1s, like your Ozempic, Wegovy, semaglutide, those kind of medicines. I'll actually utilize those for 3 to 6 months to help drop this a lot more rapidly. It's
So,
a
so you'll use a GLP-1 not as like a fertility drug, but in order to help with fertility, just to get the A1.
correct.
Okay.
To
Okay.
get that insulin down. Now, if I'm doing that, we're not supposed to be taking GLP-1s while we're trying to get pregnant. So usually in this situation, it's patients who are ready to really address root cause and they're okay taking a step back from trying.
Got it.
So we pause trying to conceive for 3 to 6 months and really focus hard on getting this under control.
Interesting.
But if we're not looking to get into medications, then there are other ways that we can help to improve insulin sensitivity. So one of the most powerful ways to do this is going to be through diet. The reason we become insulin resistant is typically because of our diet, lack of exercise, that kind of stuff. So we use nutrition to help with this. So focusing on a high protein diet, I'm generally recommending 20 to 30 grams of protein in every meal. We're doing non-starchy vegetables to keep our fiber intake up. Lots of healthy fats like avocados, olive oil, nuts. We're really limiting carb and sugar intake. So no sodas, pastries, baked goods, breads, juices, all the kind of processed stuff that we shouldn't be doing anyways. And focus our carbohydrate intake on things like sweet potatoes, lentils, beans, berries, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I always advise patients eat your carbs with fats or protein. Don't ever eat carbs on their own, and don't eat empty carbs. So include them in a meal, that's totally okay, but make sure you're having your protein and your fats with it because it actually blunts the glucose response that you'll have to those carbohydrates.
Okay. Okay.
And both men and women benefit equally from a diet like this. So high protein, low carb, low sugar, lots of healthy fats.
Is
Um,
it's and I hate that I'm saying this, Robin, and you're going to give me a virtual slap in the face, but it's so funny to me how like even as you're talking, I'm like, oh, this is for the woman, but no, it's for both. It's for both
It is
people.
for both. It is for both. Like I said, it's 50-50. Men
Yes.
have to be healthy too.
Yes. Remember this, guys. Remember this.
You're part of it. Lifestyle modifications and exercise is another big piece as well. We say movement's medicine whenever it comes to insulin resistance. So even just 10 to 15 minutes of walking after your meals can significantly lower glucose levels and the insulin response that we have to those meals. I'm a big proponent of strength training, love weightlifting, encourage weightlifting for all of my patients. So strength training improves the glucose uptake by the muscles. And so again, lowers glucose levels, insulin levels, all of that.
Okay.
Aiming for 3 to 4 days a week of strength training or some kind of resistance training, and then daily movement. Even if it's only light movement, like I said, even if it's only a 10 or 15-minute walk, we've got to be moving every day.
Yeah.
Another big tool that I like to use is a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. And we've talked about these before. I think we've got several videos out there on CGMs. But the great thing about a CGM is it's just this little sensor you apply to your arm. It continuously reads your glucose levels throughout the day, but it's going to show you real-time data on what's happening based on what you're eating
Mm.
and what's happening in your life. So sleep, stress, all that kind of stuff affects blood glucose levels. The CGM tells us at that moment what's happening with it. Um, we can detect like hidden spikes from things that you would consider normally to be healthy. Like you might think drinking a fruit smoothie is totally healthy and great. And for some people, it may be completely fine, and other people, their glucose level may skyrocket.
Yes.
So that's where the CGM is super important, especially if I have patients that have elevated insulin or have elevated glucose and they tell me, I don't know what's wrong. I eat a healthy diet, I exercise, definitely putting a CGM on at that point because Insulin's not elevated for no reason. So CGM just helps us find what those reasons are.
I like that as a quote, Robin. Insulin is not risen for no reason.
It's not elevated for no reason. The labs don't lie.
Laughs don't lie. I love that.
Yeah. So love CGMs. We talked about those a couple weeks ago, even on the live a couple weeks ago.
Yes,
Huge,
yes.
huge proponent of those. I use them on and off. I think they're awesome. And so they're also great for my patients who are trying to conceive. We
Okay.
want blood sugar levels and insulin levels to be as stable as possible. We don't want big rises and we don't want big drops in
Right.
those. So to get back to what you were asking about earlier too, so say you do get pregnant and insulin levels are still high, A1C is still high. What's our risk there? Um, you were correct. Gestational diabetes is a big risk. So if you get pregnant with insulin resistance, you've got a risk for gestational diabetes.
Okay.
Risk for preeclampsia, higher risk for miscarriages, preterm birth, macrosomia, which is where the baby gets too big, higher rates of NICU admission. I can't tell you how many times in my labor and delivery days I saw babies have to go to the NICU because the baby couldn't stabilize its own blood sugar levels. And so they end up in the NICU having to get treatment to get more stable. And then it increases long term the risk of childhood metabolic issues in those babies. And interestingly enough, there's even new emerging evidence that's linking poor blood sugar control during pregnancy to higher rates of autism and ADHD in those children.
Do you think are women just are they eating the wrong things while pregnant, or is this something? Is it all like a lack of knowledge around this? Because this seems like it'd be super easy to do. Like it's
Yeah.
you know
Well, part of it's just our culture.
yeah
The food that we're provided, what we have easy access to is junk.
yeah
I went to Europe recently and I was floored at how great and healthy everything was. You don't, your blood sugars stay stable. I think Andy's even talked
yeah
about this before when he was in Europe. Like he could eat anything and his blood sugars stayed very stable, even as a type 1 diabetic.
yeah.
So it's part of it's just the food that we have access to. And going beyond what you've always been used to can be challenging for some people. Eating a high protein, low carb diet's just not the norm in our population. So making that change can be a little bit difficult, a little bit intimidating. And some people don't know that it's a change that they need to make. And then also, yes, definitely a lack of education. So when I got pregnant with my daughter, this was 15, 16 years ago, I was pretty underweight for my height. I'm 5'8", I weighed about 115 pounds when I got pregnant. So very low BMI. And they literally told me, eat anything you want, eat all the ice cream. You can have ice cream every single day. You need to put weight on. I'm like, that doesn't sound like the best advice. Ice cream every day. Um, and then I hear the excuses of, well, I'm pregnant, so I can eat whatever I want, or, the baby's craving it, the baby wants it, so I'm going to eat it, that kind of stuff.
I,
So kind of falling into those habits is another bad thing I see.
I was going to ask you about cravings because that's something I hear often from friends who are pregnant or have been
Hmm.
pregnant is like you have these cravings and most of the time it's kind of an off the wall, not
Yeah.
super healthy craving. Is that bad?
It definitely happens. All pregnant women get these weird cravings. Sometimes it can be signs of nutritional deficiency. So we look at those cravings to see what are we lacking. Like sometimes craving chocolate means you actually need magnesium, different things like that. So looking a little bit deeper into those cravings, but also not using the cravings as an excuse to eat like crap your whole pregnancy. You actually do not need any additional calorie intake while you're pregnant. Um, so the whole eating for two thing, like your calorie burn doesn't actually go up that much during pregnancy. It's breastfeeding where we actually need to increase our calorie intake. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So adding
I didn't
about an
realize
extra
that.
500 calories while you're breastfeeding because the the metabolic demand of breastfeeding is high, but actually in pregnancy, you don't have to increase your food or calorie intake that significantly.
That's interesting. That's very,
Yeah.
that has to be very commonly misunderstood.
Oh, absolutely. So basic takeaway is insulin resistance is a big issue. And if you're struggling with fertility and this is not something that's been addressed, you need to find a provider who will look at this the right way and who will help you to address this, because we see massive shifts in fertility success whenever we control insulin resistance appropriately.
And the goal being trying to get your A1C to that range you mentioned during the episode?
Yeah.
Okay.
So A1C, 4.9 to 5.2%, fasted insulin under 10, but if we can get that fasted insulin less than 6, that's going to be even more ideal. And then fasting glucose levels in the 80s if we can get there, but 90 in the 90s at the highest.
And I'm going to remind all the men out there, that's you too. That's
That's
not
you
just
too, boys.
that's not just the women.
Absolutely. This goes both ways.
Robin, fantastic episode, fantastic topic. As we were going through the episode, I was like, yeah, this seems very, like kind of common sense, but it's something that we do not think about at all. Insulin
Yeah,
resistance and fertility, it seems like a very big deal.
absolutely.
Thank you, Robin. Guys, as always, you name it, we explain it. We'll see you next time.
Don't go away.